Welcome to today's deep dive. We have got something entirely tailored for you today.
Yeah, especially if you're, the kind of curious learner who wants to master complex strategy without just drowning in information overload.
Right, exactly. So to get us started, I want you to picture this. It's the year 1645.
Okay.
An old, undefeated warrior retreats to the Regondo Cave on Mount Iwado, and he knows he's only days away from death.
Which is an intense setting right off the bat.
It really is.
Yeah.
But instead of quietly fading away, he picks up a brush to write down absolutely everything he knows about survival, strategy, and life.
Yeah, the visual is just striking. You have the mist rising, the sheer isolation of the cave,
Probably.
and a man who has lived through unimaginable violence choosing to distill like a lifetime of life or death stakes onto just a few pieces of paper.
And that text is the focus of our journey today. We're exploring the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi alongside an extensive modern analysis suite. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack this 380-year-old samurai text and figure out how Musashi's martial wisdom translates into a highly practical philosophy for you right now.
Because, whether you're navigating a cutthroat boardroom, trying to lead a remote team, or just, searching for personal clarity in a chaotic world, the lessons in this text are shockingly applicable.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get to the philosophy, we need to understand the man. Who exactly was Miyamoto Musashi?
Well, to understand the psychology of Musashi, you first have to look at the massive cultural and political earthquake happening in Japan during his life.
Right, the shifting eras.
Exactly. He was born around 1584, growing up during the Azuchi Momoyama period, which was an era of brutal, just continuous civil war.
The entire culture was basically geared around combat.
Yeah. But as he grew older, he lifted the transition into the Edo period under the Tokugawa shogunate. And that brought nearly 2.5 centuries of relative peace.
Which creates an immediate identity crisis for an entire social class.
Oh, absolutely.
Suddenly, you have tens of thousands of warriors, the samurai, with absolutely no wars to fight.
Yeah, they essentially became bureaucrats, administrators, politicians. But Musashi was fundamentally a fighter. He refused to sit behind a desk.
He was built for a different world.
Right, so from the age of 13, he fought over 60 duels to the death and never lost a single one.
Wow.
That undefeated record built this almost mythic aura around him, yet he wasn't just a blunt instrument of violence.
Right, he had this whole other side to him.
Yeah, he was a master calligrapher, a sculptor, an architect, a profound thinker, and, the founder of his own school of swordsmanship.
The Hishili Nichiri.
Exactly. He approached martial arts as a complete philosophy of living.
So to really grasp why a modern professional should care about his written strategy, we have to look at the mechanics as how he actually fought.
Yeah, it wasn't just about swinging a piece of steel faster than the other guy.
No, not at all. And that brings us to his most legendary duel in 1612 on Ganryu Island against a swordsman named Sasaki Kojiro.
Oh, Kochiro is such a fascinating foil to Musashi. He was famous for this highly precise signature technique called the swallow cut.
Swallow cut.
Yeah, it was this intricate, sweeping strike using an oversized longsword. They said it was so fast it could strike down a bird in mid-flight.
That is terrifying.
Right. But psychologically, Kochiro was a tragic perfectionist. His entire identity and reputation were tied up in the flawless execution of this specific, rigid technique.
He expected combat to look a certain way.
Exactly.
And Musashi just weaponized those expectations against him. The historical accounts tell us Kojiro was waiting on the beach for hours, getting increasingly furious.
While Musashi is just taking his time.
Yeah, he deliberately arrives late by boat, and he doesn't even bring a real forged steel sword.
This is the crazy part.
Right, he takes a spare wooden oar from the boat and spends the ride over, casually carving it into a crude wooden weapon.
It's just a masterclass in psychological warfare. Musashi understood that Kojiro was vulnerable to frustration and totally reliant on formality.
So by arriving late and looking completely unkempt with a piece of carved driftwood,
He completely shatters Kojiro's focus before the fight even begins. When Musashi finally steps onto the beach, Kojiro is blinded by rage.
he just goes for it.
Yeah, he immediately draws his massive sword, throws away his scabbard, and executes his perfect swallow cut.
But Musashi doesn't try to block it or dodge backward. He steps in.
Right. He steps inside the arc of the weapon. A longsword is incredibly deadly at the tip, but if you step inside the swing, you neutralize its mechanical advantage.
Because Kujiro's technique was so rehearsed, its trajectory was completely predictable.
Exactly. Predictable to someone willing to violate the normal expectations of a duel. So Musashi steps inside the danger zone, brings down that heavy, oversized wooden oar, and shatters Kojiro's skull in one blow.
It's a brutal historical reality,
Yeah.
but it perfectly illustrates the radical self-reliance that forms the basis of the first section of his text, the Earth Book or the Ground Book.
Yeah. Musashi believed you cannot survive on flashy techniques alone. You have to build an unshakable foundation.
He lists 9 core principles here, right? Things like perceive those things which cannot be seen and do nothing which is of no use.
He demands that every single action, no matter how small, has a deliberate purpose.
The Earth Book acts as the philosophical bedrock for everything that follows.
Right. He's adamant that strategy isn't something you simply apply in the heat of the moment. It's a daily, grueling mindset.
You don't just start your journey by seeking enlightenment.
No, or trying to learn advanced secret tactics. You start with the earth. You start by looking at the ground beneath your feet and understanding the absolute basics of your craft.
To make this concrete, he uses this brilliant metaphor of the master carpenter.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, he writes that a master carpenter has to deeply understand the nature of his wood. He needs to know which timber is straight, strong, and unknotted to use for the load-bearing pillars.
The foundational stuff.
Right. But he also needs to recognize which wood might be a little twisted or knotted, knowing it can still be used discreetly in the construction for scaffolding, or at the very least as firewood.
And notice where the responsibility lies in that metaphor. The carpenter doesn't blame the wood if the house collapses.
Right, it's on him.
He takes absolute responsibility for assessing his materials correctly and, deploying them where they naturally fit.
Apply that to anyone listening who manages a team. Whether you're a modern CEO, a project manager, or a head coach.
Yeah, it's universally applicable.
You have to deeply understand your team's diverse strengths and weaknesses to assign tasks effectively. You cannot just wish everyone on your payroll was a straight, perfect piece of pine.
Right.
You might have an employee who is terrible at public speaking but incredible at deep-focused data analysis. That is your knotted wood. You have to know how to deploy the people you actually have in front of you.
What's fascinating here is how Musashi takes that grounded foundation and weaves in the concept of rhythm, or hyoshi.
Rhythm.
Yeah. He argues that absolutely everything in the universe operates on a rhythm. There's a rhythm to the changing of the seasons, a rhythm to the rise and fall of capital for a merchant.
And a very specific rhythm to human conflict.
Exactly.
There's a rhythm to a high-stakes corporate negotiation, too. Like the way the opposing counsel speaks, when they pause, how quickly they reply to emails.
And recognizing that rhythm is the very first step to dismantling it. If you can perceive the tempo of your competitor or your opponent, you can introduce a timing they do not expect.
You purposefully strike slightly offbeat.
Okay.
Yes.
That disruption creates a psychological and physical gap, and that gap is where they become vulnerable.
But having a solid foundation in understanding rhythm is only the beginning. I mean, a house built of strong wood doesn't move.
Right.
And in a dynamic environment, if you can't move, you die. The conversation has to shift to how you apply this grounded philosophy in motion. You have to adapt, which brings us to the second ring, the water book.
Yeah. Where the earth book is rigid and foundational, the water book is entirely about fluidity. Musashi outlines 5 attitudes or stances for holding a weapon: upper, middle, lower, left, and right.
But they aren't static.
Exactly. The critical insight he hammers home is that these are not frozen, statuesque postures. Water takes the exact shape of whatever receptacle you pour it into.
Makes sense.
So as the terrain changes or as the opponent shifts, you must flow from the upper attitude to the middle attitude without a single moment of hesitation.
This is also where he formally introduces his signature two-sword method. Holding the long katana in one hand and the short wakizashi in the other, executing simultaneous offense and defense.
Right.
But I have to push back on this concept, especially when we try to apply it to modern professional life. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain does not actually multitask. It task switches.
Yeah.
Every time you switch focus between 2 different complex actions, you lose cognitive efficiency.
Yeah.
So aren't we just diluting our focus across 2 things poorly rather than doing one thing exceptionally well? How does Musashi train around human biology?
That skepticism is entirely valid, and it's exactly what traditional swordsmen of his era argued. They believed mastering one blade was hard enough. But Musashi isn't talking about conscious, deliberate task switching. He's talking about training the body to the point of autonomous parallel processing.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
You spend 10,000 hours in the Earth book, drilling the movements until they reside in the brainstem, not the prefrontal cortex.
Ah, so the defense happens on autopilot while the conscious mind directs the offense.
Precisely. If we look at the modern business application of the two-sword method, it represents advanced resource allocation.
Give me an example.
Think about a tech company. If you put 100% of your resources into acquiring new customers, pure offense, you often neglect your core product and you lose your existing users to churn, which is pure defense.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
The two-sword method is the organizational capacity to aggressively grow market share while simultaneously reinforcing your current infrastructure. It requires ruthless systemic discipline to eliminate the lag between blocking a threat and seizing a new opportunity.
Okay, that clarifies the bridge between the two. So water keeps you fluid and alive. But fluidity alone doesn't win a confrontation. It just prolongs it.
Right.
To actually win, you eventually have to seize control of the situation. You have to transition from fluid defense to overwhelming aggression. And that is exactly what the Fire book addresses.
The Firebook takes those fluid techniques and injects them into the harsh, chaotic reality of a clash of wills. Combat, much like a hostile market takeover, is hot, fast, and driven by friction.
Definitely.
A paramount concept Musashi introduces here is holding down a pillow.
Which sounds comforting, but in practice, it's intensely aggressive.
It's about absolute suppression. Holding down a pillow means never letting the enemy raise their head. You don't just wait and react to their strike.
You proactively shut it down.
Exactly. You suppress their useful actions while allowing their useless ones. Musashi says you stop their attack at the very first syllable. If they're going to say attack, you stop them at at.
Wow.
If they prepare to jump, you check them at ju.
But physically, how do you do that without just guessing?
You learn to read the mechanical precursors to action. Before a person swings a sword or before a boxer throws a punch, their weight has to shift. A shoulder drops. Their gaze narrows.
The tells.
Right. You read the microexpressions and the biomechanics to anticipate the intent before it physically manifests into a threat.
Here's where it gets really interesting for daily life. To be able to anticipate intent like that, Musashi introduces the concept of perception and sight can.
Yeah.
He argues that sight is looking at the specific leaf on a tree. It's focusing on the immediate, glaring, tactical detail, like the flashing blade of the opponent's sword or the angry tone of an email you just received.
Right.
But perception is seeing the entire forest. It's taking in the whole strategic landscape.
The amateur only utilizes sight. They lock their eyes onto the tip of the enemy's weapon, which causes their spirit to become bewildered and panicked by its rapid movement.
Which is an easy trap to fall into.
Oh, absolutely. The master utilizes perception. They soften their gaze. They take in the opponent's posture, the uneven terrain beneath their feet, the angle of the sun, and the underlying emotional intent, all simultaneously.
And the challenge for you listening is learning to toggle between both in your daily routine. Sight is aggressively managing today's to-do list so you don't drop the ball on a project.
Yes.
Perception is zooming out and realizing that the entire to-do list doesn't actually align with your 5-year career goals, and the project itself might be obsolete. If you only use sight, you might win the immediate duel, but you'll lose the overarching war.
And to achieve that panoramic level of perception, you have to be willing to discard anything that artificially narrows your vision.
Which perfectly explains why Musashi wrote the Wind Book. Because if ultimate success requires adapting like water and perceiving the whole forest, then clinging to rigid dogmatic rules is a fatal liability.
Exactly.
Musashi spends the entire Wind Book systematically tearing down the traditions and secret techniques of rival samurai schools.
He uses wind as a metaphor for style and tradition, something invisible that sweeps through a culture and dictates how people behave.
He heavily critiques schools like the Yoshioka, right?
Yeah, the ones who relied on extra long swords or schools that taught highly stylized theatrical postures.
He essentially mocks them, pointing out that if your entire survival strategy relies on having a sword that's 2 inches longer than your opponent's, you are fundamentally weak.
Yeah.
Because what happens when you're forced to fight indoors in a narrow hallway with a low ceiling? A technique that requires a highly specific, idealized situation to work is totally useless in the chaos of reality.
if we connect this to the bigger picture, by analyzing those flawed schools, Musashi is warning us against the psychological danger of cognitive entrenchment.
Let's define that for the listener. Cognitive entrenchment.
So it happens when experts become completely trapped by the very specific skills, tools, or paradigms that once made them successful.
Ah.
You see this constantly in the modern corporate world. A legacy technology company masters a specific software or business model. They become so entrenched in their secret technique that when the market shifts toward mobile or cloud computing, they literally cannot perceive the new reality.
Their hard-won expertise becomes their ultimate blind spot.
Exactly. Musashi demands intellectual humility. You must study the ways of your competitors, not to copy them, but to understand their structural flaws and ensure you aren't falling into the same traps of rigidity.
So, by stripping away all these rigid rules, discarding secret techniques, and refusing to rely on specific tools, Musashi finally arrives at the fifth and final ring, the Void Book.
Yes,
Now, the void can sound incredibly abstract to a modern ear.
it does. When Western audiences hear words like void or emptiness, we typically associate them with nihilism, a black hole, or an absence of meaning.
Right.
But Musashi is drawing deeply on the Buddhist concept of sunyata. The void is not a dark nothingness. It's a state of boundless, unhindered openness.
So it's a psychological state.
Exactly. A state where the mind is not rigidly fixed on any one expected outcome, which means it's entirely free to respond to whatever is actually happening.
I think the best modern analogy for the void is an elite athlete entering the flow state, or a master jazz musician improvising on stage.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
When a great jazz saxophonist is playing a complex solo, they aren't consciously thinking, okay, the chord progression is changing, now I need to play a C sharp and follow it with a G.
But to build on that analogy, they can only enter that state of void because they spent 10,000 hours back in the earth book.
Right, the fundamentals.
They played those scales until their fingers bled. The void isn't magic. It's what happens when extreme disciplined preparation allows you to bypass the conscious, anxious brain.
But training acts on its own.
Exactly. In the void, you don't consciously decide to strike. The strike simply happens because the gap in the opponent's defense presented itself, and your body already knew what to do.
And this is exactly why the void is so terrifying for us today. Modern professionals love control.
We really do.
We love intricate spreadsheets, 5-year strategic plans, and highly structured daily routines. But the void requires the courage to abandon the plan the exact microsecond that reality shifts.
Yeah.
It's the capacity to act without being paralyzed by your own expectations of what was supposed to happen today.
Because the map is not the territory. The spreadsheet is not the market. The void is the practice of living and fighting completely in the territory.
As fascinating as the void is, it can still feel a bit mystical. To bring this all back down to the gritty reality of daily life, we have to look at the very end of Musashi's journey.
The final days.
Yeah. Before he died in that cage, he left behind a highly practical, almost unsparing checklist for living.
You're referring to the Dakota.
Yes, which translates to the way of walking alone. He wrote these 21 precepts and gave them to his closest disciple just 7 days before he passed away. And some of these rules are incredibly intense. He writes, accept everything just the way it is. He writes, never be jealous. And the precept that always stops me in my tracks, respect Buddha and the gods without counting on their help.
That single precept captures his entire pragmatic worldview. Honor the transcendent, respect the mysteries of the universe, but take absolute, uncompromising responsibility for your own actions. Do not outsource your agency to hope.
So what does this all mean? Let me challenge this from the perspective of the listener.
Okay.
If I read accept everything and never be jealous, is Musashi telling you to become this detached, emotionless robot who isolates themselves from the human experience? Because that sounds like an incredibly bleak, lonely way to live.
This raises an important question, and it's a crucial distinction to make. Musashi is not advocating for emotional repression. He's demanding emotional regulation. Psychologists refer to this state as cold cognition. In a high-stakes environment, whether that's a literal sword fight on a beach or a tense board meeting where a massive contract is falling apart, panic, unchecked ego, and raw emotion reliably lead to catastrophic decision-making.
So if you're burning with professional envy because a colleague got a promotion over you, your vision narrows. You
Yes.
lose that strategic perception we talked about, and you start acting out of spite instead of strategy.
And if you're relying on the gods, or in modern terms, relying on the hope that the market will magically correct itself to save your failing product line, you're living in a fantasy.
Right.
Jealousy, resentment, and false hope are all mechanisms that cloud your mind and drag you out of the present reality. By practicing radical acceptance of the situation exactly as it is, no matter how bad it is, you clear away the emotional clutter.
You see the board clearly.
Exactly. That clarity is what allows you to act with the fluidity of water and the decisiveness of fire. It is radical self-reliance.
Which brings our journey full circle. If we look back at the architecture of this deep dive, Musashi left us a complete interlocking system for navigating adversity.
He really did.
You build a disciplined, honest foundation with earth. You remain fluid and adaptable to changing circumstances with water. You learn to read intent and act decisively with fire.
And then wind and void.
Right. You ruthlessly unlearn your bad habits and avoid rigid traditions with wind. And finally, you trust your preparation enough to let go of your ego, acting purely and fearlessly in the moment with the void.
And while the listener today isn't facing down a samurai with a carved wooden oar, you are fighting daily, relentless battles. You're up against saturated competitive markets, disruptive shifting technologies, and worst of all, personal distractions and an endless barrage of information overload.
It's constant.
Musashi's ultimate, overarching lesson is that the way is in training. Mastery is not a destination you reach and suddenly stop. It's the continuous, daily refinement of your own mind, your tools, and your perception.
It's a demanding work of a lifetime. And that brings us to one final lingering thought for you to take away and chew on. Musashi famously taught that from one thing, no 10,000 things.
Right.
He believed that if you truly understand the deep underlying principles of one art, you can see those same principles operating everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So think about the digital landscape you navigate every single day.
Yeah.
If Miyamoto Musashi were to apply his concepts of perception and sight to how you consume information, right now, mindlessly scrolling through endless feeds, reacting instantly and emotionally to every notification, headline, and outrage, what would he see? Would he look at you and see a strategic master of your digital terrain, observing the whole forest with calm, detached clarity? Or would he see an untrained fighter, your vision dangerously narrowed to a single glowing screen, blindly swinging your sword at shadows?